Okay, hello everybody. This week we're picking up on stuff we talked about last week about resolving conflict. So just to kind of standard out warning from last time, there are some real examples in here from GrantTree, and I'm kind of talking more generally about conflict and relationships, and so some of this stuff is kind of likely to resonate with stuff in your own life. That doesn't mean that I'm talking about that without talking about that. That's just the nature of the stuff. It does resonate with people. Before I get into the kind of main stuff today, I just want to revisit a point which I haven't made for a while, which is that, you know, the kind of culture is what we do, right? Culture isn't just that we meet every week, you know, for an hour and we talk about some stuff together. Culture is what we do every day. It's what makes up the kind of substance of the business. So the way that we do it, the way that we work, is what our culture is. I also think it's worth revisiting. Yeah, this is kind of an important thing to say, that these two things don't exist without each other. This is an important part of open culture. Yes, it's about, you know, having fun. And if you want to know more about the idea of kind of business being fun, read Joy at Work, Dennis Barkley's book about AES, making business fun, one of the founding values of their company. You know, they ran power plants, right? So, you know, that's kind of serious business. But we also need to make money. But the point is that actually the best way to make money is by doing something that you find fun. And you can't keep doing the stuff that you find fun without making money. So these two things are constantly pulling against each other and are in harmony. Next slide. Okay. There we go. So just a recap over the last couple of weeks. So 2 weeks ago, I talked about the value of empathy and about how empathy has a kind of, you know, personal value. It's good for us because, you know, we can have fun, right? We can enjoy life more. But empathy also has a commercial value. Empathy helps us work better together, collaborate more effectively, cooperate more, and therefore helps us make money. Last week, I talked about how quite a lot of conflicts become breakdowns in empathy. There's this kind of spiral from, you know, an initial issue, which might be actually quite small, to something much bigger, and you quickly end up in a kind of self-sustaining dynamic, which is this conflict collusion loop. Let's have a look about that conflict collusion loop again. This is the kind of typical template. You know, we can start this cycle anywhere, but I see something and my interpretation is that you're being a dick. Right? I do something in response to that, right? I act in a way that you would do towards somebody who you thought was being a dick. You see what I'm doing and observe and judge that I'm being a dick, and then you act appropriately, and then I see that, and then it just goes round and round and round, and that's the kind of cycle of collusion. It's conflict that we're cooperating to sustain. Thank you. So, you know, this is kind of one way of looking at this kind of generic template. Here's a little tweak on this. You know, rather than just saying it's you, it's kind of other people are being dicks. And I really want to zoom in on this phrase and just kind of think about that a bit more. You know, what is this other people? Like, other people, when we say other people, do we mean just people in general? You know, I'm people. So if I'm going around saying other people are being dicks, do I really mean that people are being dicks? Do I really mean that I'm being a dick? Right? Remember I was talking last week about the shadow self. When you point an accusing finger at other people, 3 fingers are pointing back at you saying the same thing. So, you know, this is a way to see, you know, if you're observing, I mean, this tells us about, you know, reasons why we might have a breakdown in empathy. Other people might be doing stuff that maybe we do. But it also helps us rebuild that empathy. You know, like, I find this if I'm cycling, like the kind of road rage of just people stepping out in front of you. You just think, you know, other road users are dicks, but then you have to remember, well, you know, that's because they're people. And people can be dicks sometimes, and I guess I can be as well, and oh, okay, fine, suddenly I don't feel so angry, I'm a bit more out of the box with them, I'm able to empathize with them. So some other interesting things to think about in terms of like rebuilding empathy. You know, let's say that we have this contentious issue, and you and I have very strong beliefs about this issue that are seemingly quite polarized. Now we might look at this, right, one interpretation, one meaning that we can make of this is irreconcilable. How will we ever be able to speak to each other because, you know, our beliefs separate us because they're so different? Another way of looking at this is that we both have strong beliefs. And that's a very human thing to do, for us to believe stuff deeply and to care about those beliefs and to be passionate as a result of that. So even if we can't agree, even if we believe that our beliefs are irreconcilable, we can find a common humanity in the fact that we're both holding strong beliefs, And that gives us an opportunity to empathize with each other and therefore to kind of address the issue. I've also talked about the fact that we crave empathy. There are all of these things that we do which allow us to feel more connected with other people, and which we kind of therefore do for for fun and profit, right? And because we like to empathize, because we enjoy it, because we crave it, when we turn away from it, when we disconnect from other people, it's the opposite of pleasurable. It's a painful experience when we're denied the ability to empathize with people, and we feel that at some level. And because we feel that, because we have that pain, we look for some explanation for it. Now, the explanation that we have access to, because we know about all of this kind of in-the-box, out-of-the-box empathy stuff, is we can say, oh, this situation maybe feels a bit uncomfortable, it's kind of painful because, I've stopped empathizing. But when we're not doing that, when we don't have that level of awareness, we're still going to look for an explanation of that pain. But rather than say, the explanation is that I've gone into the box, we're going to look for a scapegoat, right? We're going to look to justify ourselves. So justification is a term that's used in carpentry and building. If you have something that's crooked and you need to make it straight, right? And this is a term that's used by Arbinger, which is where this kind of in-the-box, out-of-the-box terminology comes from. That when we stop empathizing with people, we look for something to justify it, to sort of say why it is that I've stopped empathizing with this person, why it's okay that I've started seeing this person as an object, So we want to justify both what we see and what we do in that kind of collusion cycle. And there are various different kinds of justification that we tend to engage with, right? And there are 4 key templates that are offered, which are worse than and better than, which are on this page. So we're looking at other people and we're saying, why is it okay for me to see this person as an object? Why is it okay for me to see that this person's needs are not as important or real as mine, right? And it might be because I say, well, actually, it's because I'm worse than them. There's a kind of helpless victim mode here. Or it might be because I think that I'm somehow better than them, that they don't deserve as much as I do. Linked into the kind of better than view is this idea of I deserve, which again has this kind of, I'll share the slides afterwards so you can have a look through all of this, by the way. There's too much to go into in great detail. I deserve has a kind of flavour of both, and the interesting one that must be seen as, this is, I think, a really interesting phenomenon, is that if you see somebody and you think, this person is in need of help, someone's fallen down on the road, right? You have an option which is, I go to them, I ask them, do they need help, and I kind of pick them up. Or alternatively, I think, oh, well, I don't really have time to help them. I'm starting to go in the box of them. I'm starting to say they're not really that important. I'm more important than they are. My time is more important than theirs are. I don't really have time to help them, but I don't want other people to think that I'm somebody who doesn't help people. So I'll sort of pretend not to have seen them, so that I can maintain my reputation for goodness without actually having to act on it. As we start doing that kind of performance, that kind of fakery of being helpful, it moves us away from our ability to help, right? Now, these are some of the kinds of justifications that we do, like ourselves when we're going to the box, but there's another thing that we do, which kind of fits into this seeing and doing, this kind of two-person cycle of, conflict and breakdown of empathy, and that's that we seek to strengthen our worldview by forming allies, right? So, broadly speaking, the stuff that I see and do is my worldview, the stuff that you see and do is your worldview. So if in my worldview, I'm saying that you are less than me, you're an object, you're a problem, your needs are not as great as mine, I can seek justification for that, not only by one of those kind of 4 defenses or some other way of, making me feel good about that. I can build justification for that by going to my allies and saying, oh, isn't this person terrible? Or whatever the defense is that I'm using, I can reinforce it, right? And this is where we get the kind of pantomime villain view of people from it, because we say, oh, this person is terrible, and then we go off and we talk to our allies about how terrible they are, and it becomes more and more of a thing that we have this picture of a terrible person, and it deviates more and more from who they actually are, which is another human being just like us, right? So some examples to kind of illustrate this, which may seem a bit kind of fanciful, but I mean I think they're interesting. This is one that's given in Anatomy of Peace, right? Isaac and Ishmael were the sons of Abraham, and there was a dispute about which of them should have inherited, right? Now Isaac was the head of the house that became the Israelites, the Jews, and Ishmael was the head of the house that became the Muslims, the Arabs. So, broadly speaking, you could see that this could happen, that you could have two sons who fall out over the fact that there's a dispute over inheritance, who start to build a story about how, the other one is, less than, a villain of some kind, who seek allies in their immediate family, their children, their partners, right? And then this is passed on from generation to generation. And you might say, okay, that's a little bit fanciful. But thinking back to the slide that we had earlier about how, other people, right? If I say other people are doing this, it's a sure sign that I've gone into the box. And the reason for that is that other people is this kind of impersonal monolith, Other people is an object. And it's very easy for us to start saying, and so one of the things that we can do to test, have I gone into the box, is can I actually lessen the conflict by rebuilding some empathy? So one of the things that maybe is going on here in the kind of entrenched conflict in the Middle East, right, is to do with the fact that there is a breakdown of empathy here that's kind of long-standing and starting to be created by whole societies. And there was a psychologist called Erin Halperin. There's a program about this on Radio 4. I put a link on People and Culture, I'll repost it, who did some work on this in Israel and Palestine and found that actually, if you expose a group of Palestinians to a newspaper article in which Israelis are being self-critical in any way, right, they can be self-critical about Israeli education policy, for instance, then having shown them that article, the group of Palestinians are more likely to be receptive to discussion with Israelis about the conflict and about potential solutions to the conflict. So, this is, in some ways, a breakdown in empathy that has spread. Right? Another example, to which I thank Ish for introducing me to this, it's a good example, it's the same thing, right? Like the East Coast-West Coast divide. It's the same thing. You essentially have two people in the middle, and then that spreads out to their group of connections who begin to build a story about how all the people on the other side of the divide are in some way like pantomime villains. This is a phenomenon that there's a fantastic article from this guy who writes a blog called Slate Star Codex. And he talks about in-groups and out-groups. One of the things that we tend to do as human beings is we tend to over-exaggerate both the closeness of affinity that we have to other members of our in-group and over-exaggerate the level of difference that we have from people in our out-group. So the example that he uses in Slate Star Codex is Republicans and Democrats in the USA. Right? They tend to say, oh, we're a million miles apart, we couldn't be more different. Whereas actually they're closer than they think they are. And actually, probably within the tent of kind of Democrats, there are people with whom you have less in common than there are some Republicans, if that makes sense, right? It's a little bit confusing, but it's a very interesting article. Again, I'll post it. Yeah, the reality is much more like this. People are arranged sort of more around. Right, so it's not as even, and the spacing is closer. So to think of an example about this kind of in-group, out-group conflict that's a bit closer to home, right? If we think about, what the reconciliation that we've talked about between Dan and George and the kind of breakdown in trust that they were having, there were allies in this case to help cement kind of the worldview. Like, I'm an ally on the side of Dan, Don's an ally on the side of George. But then actually, in the way that happens, it becomes more than just about whatever caused the breakdown in trust, and becomes about a dynamic, and the dynamic begins to spread, and we begin to tell stories to justify it. So instead of it being about two people, it becomes about kind of having fun, kind of culture, right? And making money, kind of commercial. But as I said at the start, these two things are two sides of the same coin. There's a push-pull interplay here. They cannot be separated. So it's a totally false opposition that we've created in order to justify some, like some systemic conflict that's going on. And but as soon as it starts to escalate to this big story, we start to bring in other allies on the outside who are, allies of mine and allies of Don's, and also who are allies to the kind of concept. And what we end up with is, the kind of two tribes going to war effect. But the situation that we have now, right, is much more like this. We have four people who are working well together. We have a view that these two things are inseparable, right? The culture is the way that we achieve our commercial aims. We can't take them apart. So what changed? How did we get from a system in which these things were all in opposition to a system in which these things were in harmony? How was the situation healed? Right? There are two key things, I think. The first is you have to put down the racket. You have to stop playing the game of conflict, and you have to be willing to do that if you want to effect a reconciliation. Because if you haven't put down the racket, you're still playing the game. And the overtures that you make for peace are within the game, right? They will be received by the other person as things that make the conflict worse. So you have to see each other, you have to be willing to see each other as people, right? You have to be willing to see that the other people have hurt in a situation that is as real as yours. That the problems that they have, that you are causing, are as real as the problems that you have, that you see that they are causing. Their problems are as real as yours. Their needs are as real as yours. And that's basically what I'm saying here. Is the first step is you've got to get out of the box. You've got to stop the conflict, and you've got to build the empathy. And when you've done that, you have the opportunity to do three things. You have the opportunity to see the conflict more clearly, the original source of the conflict. Right, this is the Wizard of Oz effect last week, right? We're opening the curtains and we're seeing the little man behind the screen. You have the opportunity to start to let go of the stuff that has happened, which isn't easy. You remember the quotes at the end of last week, all of those quotes about how hard letting go is. You also have the opportunity to put it right. Once you start empathizing with other people, your instincts will start to tell you, what is it that I need to do to make this right? We're actually very good at this once we start tuning into it. So thinking about the kind of steps to how did we get there? How did we get to a situation where we were able to do all of those things, where, in this particular instance, Dan and George were able to do it, how do we replicate it more generally? I think the first thing to say is that we used the broader system of relationships, right? We said that this was a conflict that had become more systemic. Well, the answer is that actually peace can flow systemically as well. Just as two-person conflict can spread out and become something else, so peace can be spread inwards. So Dan and I start with quite a good relationship, right? So I use that to talk to Dan to say, you've got to build compassion here, you've got to open some window, you've got to try and get out of the box, although that's not terminology that I've got at the time. Also, George and I speak. We have discussions about it. We talk about what his needs are. We start to explore it. We're building our relationship. I talk to Don, right? I start to build my relationship with Don. Don and George have already got a strong relationship. They talk. Don and Dan talk, right? This is the piece that we're trying to heal, and we do it by building all of this other stuff up so that this bit can be fixed into place. So what we've done is we've said the first step is, get out of the box. The second step is work on the wider system of relationships. And then the final step is to work on the specific relationship itself. And you could say that actually working on the wider system helped get out of the box, but maybe it was me getting out of the box with Dan and George that enabled the other stuff, enabled them to get out of the box with each other, because it kind of nests, right? Getting out of the box, working on that. Anyway, one of the other effects of this is that healing the Dan and George conflict helps heal the Don and Andrew conflict, right? Because we build empathy with each other as people, but also empathy with each other's work. And I think that's really important in this context, that we have to empathise with each other's work. We have to believe that other people's work is important and valuable as much as our own is, right? Because otherwise we'll break down the empathy with the person. Those two things are intimately connected. But so the things that Don and I did was, we worked together to help Dan and George, right? We saw Dan and George improving their relationship. Our friends are becoming better friends. And as their system is no longer sustaining this collusion conflict, we no longer need to stand as allies on the side sustaining it, right? So those three things parallel the three things on the previous slide, right? By working together to help, Don and I work on our relationship. By Dan and George rebuilding their trust, that's the wider system, that's the relationship that we're connected to, that's helping us strengthen our relationship. And by no longer needing to be the allies for the collusion conflict, we can be out of the box with each other. Now these 3 steps, it turns out, right, are the start of a pyramid, right? And this pyramid goes on, and there are 3 more steps. And this is, I think this is really interesting that this really is a pyramid. A pyramid is a great way to represent this way of achieving peace, because each step rests on all of the preceding steps. And also the steps at the bottom are more important and deserve more resources than the steps at the top if you want to work in an effective way. So the way to bring peace, right, the way to heal a conflict that you're in, or the way to help other people heal a conflict that they're in, first, get out of the box. Empathize with all of the people concerned, or as many of them as you can, right? Get as far out of the box as you can. Work on the wider system of relationships. What influence can you have on the situation without having to engage in it directly? What positive influence can you have? Then start to build the relationships with the people concerned, right? And only when the relationships are working can you start to learn from them. Learn from them about their worldview. Learn from them about what's been happening for them and how the conflict's been affected them. Listen to them. Only when you've listened to them and understood where they're coming from can you start to teach them. Can you speak to them? Can you explain a different way of doing things? And it's only when you've done all of these things that you can correct problems when they go wrong. Right? So what's interesting here is that all of the things down here is about helping stuff go right. And it's only this little bit at the top that is about fixing problems when they go wrong. Now, as human beings, we're very problem-oriented. We tend to see problems, right, and to talk about them. But what we learn here, is that if we are living in a more empathetic way, if we're embracing these ideas, that we need to put more of our time and effort into helping things go right. Considerably more than we do into helping, into fixing when things go wrong. And I think it's important to kind of restate at this point how effective this way of being is. I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and the more I think about it, the more I think, take Jesus, right? Now, if you're not of the Christian faith, then you might say, okay, Jesus was a historical figure. Okay, well let's talk about him in those terms. Which is the perspective that I have, right? So that's where I'm going to be speaking from. And I think about Jesus, and I think Jesus had a huge impact on the world, right? We can't deny that, right? Because we all know who he is. I don't have to tell you. I don't have to put up a picture. I don't have to tell you the story. You're kind of all broadly familiar with it. And you're probably broadly familiar with the key lessons, of his teachings, right? His teachings are essentially live life through the way of love, right? Live life through empathy. This is the strongest way of being that you can have. And think about how powerful the impact of his ideas has been on the world. And think also about the way in which, for people at the time, his influence was so disproportionately large that the only way that some people could make sense of it was to say, well, he must be in some way a divine figure. Right? I've talked before about how, when we were talking about having a vision for the future and the importance of having a vision for the future, that really effective people do have this dream and this view. And that's, that's stuff which has a pattern that's repeated in 7 Habits, or there's the excellent TED talk that Jeff posted from Simon Sinek, thank you. Yeah, about powerful ways of being in the world and purpose-driven ways of being in the world. This kind of empathetic way of being is a really powerful tool in achieving things and in changing the shape of the world, in being an agent for change. There is a little bit of a downside at first, which is that when you start doing this, it can feel like things are getting worse. 2 reasons. One is that the conflicts that perhaps have been turn-away conflicts, where you've both been ignoring the fact that you're in a kind of collusion loop, become turning towards conflict. So you end up being more openly hostile with people for a short period of time. That can be uncomfortable. It can also be uncomfortable as you start to empathize with more people more of the time, because you see ways in which you would like to help them. You see that they have needs, that they're suffering, but you can't help everybody, right? You can't help other people without their permission. That's the first thing. But you don't have time to help everybody, even if everybody gave you permission. So you're going to see things that you can't help with. And that's the ache of compassion. You long to help, but you can't help. That's one of the reasons why we go into the box, is to prevent ourselves from experiencing the ache of compassion. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, kind of the defense mechanism to, like London overpopulation is that we do this, we break empathy because, there's so many people who we could be compassionate towards. How do we do it? So things are going to maybe seem like they're going to get worse before they get better. But think about some analogues that you might be more familiar with. If you ever started kind of meditation, the thing about beginning a meditation practice is you discover at first just how noisy your mind has been. So you have this impression that it's like, oh my God, I've started meditation and my mind is so much noisier and busier. How much worse is this? Actually, that was as noisy and busy as it was. You're just tuning into it. You're just noticing. Similarly, if you're starting a fitness regime, you're like, oh my God, I'm so unfit, why am I doing this? Well, that was how unfit you were. It's just you're noticing, you're doing something about it. So those things are kind of there already, but they will surface as you start to engage with that. So do be aware of it. So those are the things that I wanted to introduce you today. This is the kind of last piece that I have around this interesting stuff from Harbinger around, like empathy as a way of doing business and solving conflict. I'm away next week, so instead you'll be having difficult conversations with Daniel Tennant. I'm sure you've all had difficult conversations with Daniel Tennant before, but this will be an excellent introduction to the techniques of the book of the same name. As usual, questions and comments.
I've always been in this sort of stuff, as you know, but I think recently it's becoming more and more hard-hitting, all the content, which is really good. But also sort of getting back to the sort of collating people's comments and then sort of building arguments around alliances.
Sam, I think. Can you be closer?
Yeah, sorry. So basically the question is, what's the take-home message for trying to resolve those issues with sort of people getting on side with other people and that sort of thing in terms of, building your side and building the other person's side and all this sort of back talk? There's probably something we can do now. Maybe it's baby steps, but it would be good just to know, what's the thing we can do right now.
This is it. Yeah. If you see other people are in conflict and you want to help them get out of conflict, right? Ask yourself, where are you already with those people in this pyramid? If you're looking at them and going, oh, they're in conflict, that's such a human thing to do. That's exactly the sort of thing that I would do. I bet I could even guess why they're doing it, given what I know about them. Right? Okay, that's great. You're probably out of the box. Right? Is your relationship good with that person already? Right? Maybe if you're out of the box and you have a good relationship with them already, you're there. So you can go to learn and listen, and you can say, I've observed that some stuff's going on. I'd just like to know a little bit more about what's happening here for you. Right? Alternatively, maybe you've done learn and listen. Maybe you know everything that's going on, and it's time to teach and speak. We tend to jump to teach and speak too early. We tend to say, let me tell you how you should do this, let me fix this problem for you. But actually, we haven't fully understood the other person's position. So probably a good place to go in is, if that's going on, is to say, I'm observing that there's this thing, I'm not sure it's super helpful, but I'd really like to find out is, what's going on for the other person here? Why is this happening? I've noticed that you've been saying to me quite a lot recently this stuff about this other person, and I just wonder where that's coming from. I'd really like to find out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just also on top of that, sort of another question is, if you're not part of the conflict and you're just sort of observing it, like I tend to hear a lot of back talk, which I'm like, come on, think about it sort of a bit more. That person's not actually bad. So how do you kind of, as an independent advisor, just kind of say, look, think about this, or is there any kind of techniques that, as an independent person, you could use? Because that's, I guess, my struggle at the moment is, I can see them to help those people, but I'm not able to do so.
So if you see them and you want to help, and you've done listening and learning, you understand where they're coming from, you understand their worldview and why they're doing what they're doing, right? Then the best thing to do is to try and open out some possibility for empathy. And the techniques that I've kind of dropped in over the last few weeks that you can use to rebuild your own empathy with someone, you can offer them to other people as well. It's like the strong beliefs one. You're like, you're in conflict with this person. And it's kind of hurt. You're talking about the way in which this person is hurting you and causing you problems. I wonder if maybe they might be experiencing some hurt or perceiving the situation differently or experiencing some problems. You know, offer them the things which you're passionate and to empathise with that person. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Could there be a situation where you, for example, are out of the box and you see why you're in conflict with someone, but they're not, so then that's kind of almost harder because you think, I can see why you're behaving this way, but you kind of can't see it yet. Mm-hmm. Is there kind of an easier way to deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, that to me, you know. So if we're in a situation where, you know, like the dynamic of our relationship has not been working well, and I see it, and I'm like, oh, I see that this is a thing that we've been doing now. What I want is for it to change. It's like, okay, well, where are we here? Like, are we in a point where what I could do is I could work on our relationship? Like, you know. Because if you have that perspective on a situation that you're in, that's fantastic. You then have the opportunity to be like, how have I contributed to this problem? Because there's a dynamic that we've been sustaining between us. That's a great way to lead into it and say, right, I'm going to change myself. Because you have complete control of your end of the relationship. You don't have control of the other end. So if you want to work on the relationship, the first thing to do is to change your half of it. And then see how that changes it and how that opens up your ability to listen and learn about their world, and then start to teach and speak, to start to make requests about how it is that you'd like them to change. Does that help?
Yeah.
From Mike's point of view, that's part of the recruitment process, is avoiding people that have that capability or have that inability, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, you know, definitely this stuff I think fits in well with the kind of stuff that we're doing in the Culture Fit interview, where we are looking for people who either have or have clear potential to develop a certain level of kind of, you know, like relational skills, because a lot of this is system thinking. Right? I know it seems in some ways like this is a million miles removed from the, you know, stuff which I was pushing towards the end of last year. I haven't forgotten about it, I promise, around workflow stuff. But actually there is a big overlap, which is they're both about saying, can you start to think more at the level of the system rather than just at the level of the nodes? Because then you can work on a two-person relationship, and you can work on broader systems as well. You know, like, it's applying, how do you apply change to a system? You could use this pyramid of change to help heal, you know, a two-person relationship that isn't working, but it's exactly the same technique if you aspire to be a force of peace, you know, for two societies that are at war, right? Any human system will respond to this pyramid of change applied in this order. Any more? Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.